various places that you are. My colleague Karen, who's doing the behind the scenes and heavier lifting work for Elliott Bay Book Company and myself. But we're delighted, along with our colleagues here. Elliott Bay Book Company is a bookstore that's on Duwamish land in the city of Seattle, in the northwestern part of the United States. And we're greatly delighted both to be doing this evening in concert with Seattle Isfahan Sister City Advocacy, and in doing so to be bringing you this program with author, artist, and much more. Community cultural instigator Ari Honarvar, whose book because I'm about to talk about her organization and her book at the same time, not get tangled up. But the program is for her remarkable first novel, A Girl Called Rumi, which came out this past fall, a few months ago. And the part of the pleasure of doing these evenings with Zoom is sometimes that the book came out today, you have to do these things right away. This book has had a great response, so we were glad to be able to kind of follow it and be in touch in various ways to have it happen. And Ari, who's with us from San Diego, who's done a lot of other work over the years, including her nonprofit organization called Rumi with a View. And Karen will have information both on her book and links along the way. This is a first novel, and it really is a novel. You say the name Rumi and you think poems. There is poetry in this book. There are other texts. Drawing of Ari is a daughter of Iran, and the language of Farsi is very much something she's worked with in this book. Includes returns to Iran, it's set both in this country and also in Iran. I think you'll hear a little more of that setup in terms of how the book is set. From the other person you'll hear from tonight, who we're delighted to have, Cathia Geller, who is here, and you may have just heard, she and Ari share the birthplace of Shiraz in common. But Cathia is the president of Seattle Isfahan Sister City Advocacy. And the term Sister City Advocacy means, because it's not a formal approved association. Seattle has had an active Sister City program, and then came to kind of a pause, which has been now many years ago. What Seattle and Isfahan Sister City Advocacy have been doing is remarkable, even without that formal kind of sanction, in making contact, cultural exchange, and connection, where are not necessarily helpful governments aren't. And doing this various programs such as this and others, we've been lucky to co-present with Siska. And we were just checking beforehand, Iran, the country, or the various cities, there are many sister city relationships they have with other cities in other parts of the world. The only city in the United States that has any such formal connection is Los Angeles with the city of Tehran. So let's hope that Seattle and Isfahan can become the other formal one, and that there should be more. San Diego should be there too. Anyway, tonight you will hear Ari and Cathia in conversation. Ari will read a little bit from this lovely, wonderful book, which has many things going on. It's got marvels here, and it has serious things happening in Iran, but it's an extraordinary story she's written. We hope you will add to the stories tonight, ask questions in the chat, which Cathia will work in later in the hour. And I think that's it. I will get out of the way and disappear and reappear at the very end. You are in excellent hands. So now I think it's good to just say enjoy. And now please join in giving good virtual attention and applause to Ari Honarvar and Cathia Geller. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Thanks for that great introduction and for the information on Sister Cities. Yes, we are a citizen volunteer, Iranian Americans and their allies, and we've been working for almost 5 years trying to set up a sister city but we're basically using the platform of a sister city to bring cultural exchange and bring the countries of America and Iran together with the excuse of a sister city. But in so doing, we have opened up the doors to greater understanding about Persian culture and arts and traditions to kind of dispel some of the misinformation that's out there about us as a people. And Ari has done a phenomenal job of doing that through literature now. And she's doing wonderful work with her organization, which she founded, called Rumi with a View. And she's dedicated to building music and poetry bridges across war-torn and conflict-ridden borders, which is so timely right now. I love the work that you're doing. She dances with refugees on both sides of the US-Mexico border, and her writings have appeared in The Guardian, Teen Vogue, Washington Post, Newsweek, and elsewhere. She's the author of Rumi's Gift Oracle Cards from 2018, and this year, A Girl Called Rumi, actually 2021. So the way I found out about the book was I was listening to this wonderful podcast on KBOO FM, which is a public radio program. And I was very intrigued by the premise of the book because I felt myself reflected in it. The timeline is something that I lived. It was the beginning of the revolution, and I was older than the main character, but I could relate so much to the character. And I love the way that she approached our history and our lived experiences through this book. And then I loved what she was doing with her organization. So I went back to my team and I'm like, we need to do something with Ari. So here we are. Our wonderful partners at Elliott Bay totally jumped on board and wanted to have Ari's book and have this interview with her. So Ari, welcome to the Pacific Northwest.
Thank you so much for having me. I also want to thank Elliott Bay for hosting us, and SISCA, of course, is an organization after my own heart. And thank you, Nancy and Cathia and everyone else who made this event possible. I'm so excited.
Oh, I'm really excited for people to get this book and read it. Whether you're Iranian or you're not, you will find something in these pages, either reminiscing about your own history or things you've heard from family members. Or if you're not Iranian, you'll get to learn a lot more about our history and this particular period in time and our traditions. So why don't you start us off with a quick glimpse, like a quick little elevator pitch about what the book is all about and what motivated you to write it? Because I feel like as immigrants, we all come with a story, a history, a mission, and I want to know what was yours and how did that shape this book?
Of course, yeah. The story is about a girl who goes to buy naan for dinner, but ends up getting derailed and ends up hearing a story and changes everyone's lives in the process. So I was a little bit younger than the main character, Kimia, in 1981, and wanted to, through the eyes of a child growing up in those times in the city of Shiraz, provide a glimpse of what was that like for our readers. What happened was that when I was 6, women of Iran lost their right to ride a bicycle or sing in public, and music and dancing became illegal. Freedom of expression became curtailed and dissidents were punished. Then Saddam Hussein of our neighboring country of Iraq took advantage of this internal turmoil and attacked Iran and started a war that lasted 8 years and destroyed countless lives. So when I say this out loud, it sounds almost fantastical, like something from a dystopian novel, Handmaid's Tale, but we lived it, millions of us, Cathia and I and millions of others. We were being attacked from outside and we were being attacked from within. There was an actual war. We were so on the edge that people would have heart attacks when a door would slam too loudly. Kids and teens started having gray hair. There was so much loss and grief And in my elementary school, there wasn't a kid who hadn't lost someone to the regime's crackdowns or war. And then there was the war on joy, which hurt in a different way. Our favorite pastimes became a crime. Playing cards, music, dancing, playing backgammon. As girls, we couldn't run or laugh or bring any kind of attention to ourselves. We had to cover our bodies and blend into the background. So much so that we were disappearing bit by bit while our civil liberties were being systematically stripped away. People, of course, hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets and protested this injustice, but the regime's tactics became more brutal and more horrific. There were public lashings, there were executions, there were public hangings. Because we couldn't express ourselves and let our hair down and summon joy, there was a war on our coping mechanisms. We had two options. One, take risks that could end our freedom or life, or really become resourceful in how we brought joy into our lives. One of those ways was the soul-saving power of poetry and storytelling. And this is why I wanted to tell this story. I didn't want to provide or present a singular experience. We brought joy into our lives no matter what. So the book doesn't just rely on what was wrong during a terrible time, but all that was right too. The delight of childhood friendships, the breathtaking nature of Shiraz and the mountains surrounding it, the food, the poetry. I wanted to honor both joy and suffering because that's life, a dance between joy and suffering.
I love that. You covered so much ground with that. And it reminds me of something my dad always says, which is Persians are like blades of grass. We bend, but we don't break. So we've been conquered, and so much has happened to us throughout history where anyone else maybe would have been flattened, but we have somehow bounced back and gone inside. So like you and your family, probably we took everything inside closed doors. Behind closed doors, we continued as if nothing had changed. And but it was still very challenging. So speaking of challenge, what were the challenges in writing moving between two time frames? Because obviously it's 1981 and 2009 are the two time frames in the book. I don't want to give too much away, but was there any challenge with that?
Yeah, just to give a little background, I chose 2009 as the destination, the other destination, because while I was able to move to the US, life continued to be difficult for people of Iran without freedom of expression. In fact, the war on coping mechanisms still continues. But there was a ray of hope in 2009 with the Green Uprising, the biggest anti-government movement since 1979. So I thought that would be a good moment to write about, to juxtapose the two pivotal moments of unrest, as well as alluding to the events of the 1953 CIA coup. Of course, as we know, the fight for freedom still continues in bursts and in fits and bursts, but I spoke with friends who were present in Shiraz in 2009. And so the challenge was to present that time accurately because I wasn't there. And my sister helped fact check the 1981 the timelines. And so keeping the events grounded in reality while bringing an element of magic to the story was the biggest challenge.
There's so much magic in this story. I was, I listened to it on audio because I needed to read it very quickly so that we could talk. And I would just spend time going, what? How? What just happened? I was really transported. It was a novel that really engaged. Usually I read murder mysteries and I'm really engaged by them. So I really felt so engaged by this novel in a way I haven't with books of this sort, but I really love the way you had handled that. So clearly, whatever the challenge was, you overcame it. So how autobiographical is the book? I mean, you alluded to some of it.
Sure. Yeah. So it's basically a tapestry weaved with memories and imagination. I did a bit of research too, as I mentioned, to keep the timeline and descriptions of place and events somewhat accurate. But because the work is fictional, I really enjoy the freedom of world building without being too constrained. And in the end of the book, I talk about some of that process and some of the events that were real, such as our neighbor's birthday party that was raided by the morality police, and a woman, our neighbor, ended up having a seizure in our front yard. And an armed man held us at gunpoint and wouldn't let us help her. And so that's a scene in the book. And of course, there is a part where my brother, sister, and I hid a horse in the basement, which is so fantastical that I had a hard time to convincing my copy editor that that was not part of the magic and that was something that actually happened. and then there is a scene when Cathia is entertaining her frightened schoolmates during an air raid by making impressions of the characters of the popular children's show at the time, Madrese Mushha, the School of Mice. That bit is also true. My mother came in to pick me up that day and was so surprised that the kids weren't crying and upset like they normally would during such a scary time. They were laughing and they were getting to the whole thing.
That's awesome. I love hearing that little bit of behind the scenes, behind the curtain. So Cathia, can you tell us a little bit about the significance of her name? I know you and I talked about this, because who does she represent in the greater scheme of things? And I think you might be able to read something for us to illuminate that.
Of course, there are two reasons why I chose the name. First of all, kimia or kimyagari is the word for alchemy in Farsi. The Persian mystics, including Rumi and Attar, were all about alchemy, like the transformative powers of life. And in a materialistic understanding of alchemy, there is a doer and there's a subject, there's a base metal, and there is an elixir, a secret formula that turns that base metal into gold. But in the mystic kimyagari, because the mystic alchemist dances with participatory consciousness, she and the object of her alchemy are both transformed, and the elixir ends up always being a transformation, a manifestation of love. So that's why kimia in Farsi both means the elixir and the process of transformation. But then the other reason is that Kimia Khatun was Rumi's daughter, who was wedded to Shams, Rumi's beloved teacher. So I'm going to read an excerpt. Here's a place where the adults are talking and Kimia and Arman, Kimia's older brother, are eavesdropping. And because of how polarized people became during that time, a 12-year-old Arman is pro-Islamist and aspires to join the morality police. And the scene takes place right before the Iran-Iraq War and right after many executions and crackdowns, the first wave that sends shock through the whole land of Iran. So here's Arman recounting that day. I can't help but smile, remembering how one time I caught Kimia with her ear to the living room door. I had just finished my homework at the kitchen table and was listening to our parents talk with their guests. We all love and celebrate Molavi, but didn't he marry his teenage daughter to that old geezer, Shams Tabrizi? I heard Maman say. And what did Shams do? Did he beat her to death, as some claim, or did she die because she was so unhappy in her marriage? Wait, my dad said. What do Rumi and Shams have to do with what's going on right now? Leave it to my beautiful wife to turn the conversation to her favorite subject. Everyone laughed. Amu Doctor clapped, saying, good, good. What better subject? Don't talk of nothing but beauty, a burning candle and sweetness. Thank you, Ali John, but I am talking about what's happening now, said Maman, her voice full of passion. The point is, nobody cares what happened to Rumi's daughter because women aren't seen as people. Society mistreats us and history erases us. So I don't care who's in charge. They're going to try to sarkoob women. During Reza Shah, they pulled my mother's hijab from her head. No respect at all. She didn't leave the house for months. Now they're forcing us to wear rags on our heads. You're absolutely right, Dai Jalal said after a pause. If you think about it, freedom of thought is a feminine way of governance. In that approach, there is no fear of ideas, political or otherwise. A patriarchal society like this can't handle freedom of thought. Just like women, thoughts will have to be controlled for this kind of governance to survive, for this kind of government to survive. We weren't always like this, my dad said. Go look at the Persepolis statues, women commanders alongside men. Even before then, women were known to be rulers as qualification determined their position, not their gender. I didn't know about all that. I mean, could you imagine my mother as a leader? She would burn down the whole country and start World War III with her temper. Besides, I liked the simplicity of the new rules. I knew my place in the world. Upstanding boys like Murtaza respected me and were going to introduce me to the commander. I got up from the kitchen table and headed to the living room. I was about to tell the grown-ups what I thought when I saw Cathia balled up in the corner like a mouse. I felt the regular urge to slap my sister on the back of the head. She was always breaking the rules. Please don't tell, Cathia begged, looking at me with sad eyes. Her left cheek bore a pink groove, a pillow mark she must have gotten from sleeping on her side. She was still wearing her Bruce Lee shirt. A yellow stain brightened one of Bruce Lee's nunchucks. I sighed. All right, go to bed. But now, before I change my mind, she slammed herself into me, squeezing me tight with her little body before hurrying to her bedroom. She almost knocked the air out of me, that little moosh.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I love how you go back and forth between the characters so that we get different perspectives on whatever is happening. And that's so invaluable because it's not just seeing it through the eyes of Cathia, but seeing it through several different characters, which actually brings me, what was the most difficult one to, did we talk about which one was the most difficult character to write about?
I don't think so.
Yeah, which one was the most difficult character?
I would say the adult Cathia was definitely a challenge. So the idea was that she became a shell of her former spunky, vibrant self when she became an adult, albeit very successful and functional. So the challenge for me was to essentially write a shadow of a person, not in a boring way. Just because the character has lost touch with the magic, that doesn't mean that she has to seem flat. So I did a million revisions before I got her to the point where she felt alive and three-dimensional, even with her quirks and problems.
But it was very valuable to have those quirks and problems built in because you had built the book up to that point so the readers could know where it was coming from. What about okay, so something that's really important, and obviously there was a piece in here where there's poetry woven into everything, right? Especially in Shiraz, being from Shiraz, it's the land of poetry. So half the conversation is always poetry. People are always reciting poetry. Even in Isfahan, I can say, people gather under the famous bridge to recite poetry on a regular basis. So poetry and storytelling is a Persian cultural thing, and it's really important. How did that play an important role in your book?
Yeah, so I think I joke that like my mother's love language is poetry, because we don't have a lot of emotional expressions, things to talk about emotions, but we have a ton of poems that do such a beautiful job of expressing ourselves. And you and I come from a culture really that poetry is as much part of us as our very heartbeat. I mean, we recite poems not only in celebrations, but in welcoming sorrow and despair, and even when we're resolving conflicts. So the words of Hafiz and Attar and Rumi and Tahir, they've been passed on from generation to generation. And I don't think I can recall a time where they weren't part of me. And I'm not definitely unique in that. So you hear verses both in bustling modern offices and in remote villages, all across different demographics and background, from the well-educated to those who can't even read or write. So of course it would show up in the book. And as part of what Siska and Rumi with a View are doing is bringing a bit of that culture to our American family. So as a response to the never-ending tensions between the government of US and Iran, I started a Drop Poems, Not Bombs project, in which American musicians learn a verse of ancient Persian poetry in Farsi and sing it as a love letter to the people of Iran. We've had remarkable, talented musicians, including Grammy winners, arrange Rumi to bluegrass, opera, rap, hip hop, and so on. And it's been very well received both by Americans and Iranians.
I love that idea. We'll have to replicate it somehow with Siska here in Seattle. These are the kind of projects we love taking on. So that's beautiful. I love it. And food is another thing that's central to Persian culture. And obviously, that's something that Siska has worked on as well with our dinners that are based in Seattle and Iran, an exchange of menus and recipes and people gathering around food, breaking bread together to understand each other, right? So how did you weave food into the story? And, maybe tell us a little bit about naan or something like that that's in the book that will whet their appetites, the readers' appetites.
Of course, yeah. As you and I were talking, and Nancy, I realized that naan, especially naan sangak, played an important role in the plot. Several major events revolve around buying naan, from the first one being the 9-year-old Kimia going to buy naan sangak for dinner and getting derailed, of course, by pausing to hear a story in the square. And just this simple action just also changes everyone else's trajectory. And so naan sangak is the bread that is made in an oven on hot pebbles. And sometimes you even see the pebbles stuck in the naan, which is delightful. Drinking tea, you'll see a ton of that in the book too, because that's something that happens a lot in the Persian culture. So I'm going to read a passage, if that's okay, from the 2009 adult Kimia, who is in San Diego and goes to visit her mother and collides with a mysterious bird and gets knocked down to the ground and begins to relive her experience as a 9-year-old in war-torn Iran. And the mythical creature Simorgh, which shows up in the book a lot and is on the cover. Simorgh is the symbol of transformation and is always lurking around somewhere throughout the book. So this is right after she gets knocked to the ground and loses consciousness.
Mhm.
When I come to, I'm sitting at my mother's kitchen table, holding an ice bag to my head. The last thing I remember was being in the garage, wondering how my mother, old, frail, and unhinged, had packed up her house in a few hours. Then, out of nowhere, a large bird came flying at me. Mama, I asked, did you know there is a bird in your garage? It's big, like an emu or a peacock. Maybe it escaped from the zoo? You need to eat, she says, arranging 7 dishes in front of me. This is my mother's idea of a little snack. I inhale the scent of khoresht fesenjoon, suddenly famished. My mother places a ladle of the steaming stew on top of a mount of saffron painted rice. She spoons yogurt and cucumber mixed with nuts and berries into a small bowl and piles Shirazi salad with chopped fresh mint on a plate. Bokhor aziz, she says, out of reflex. Eat, darling, even though I have already begun eating. The food is delicious, Roya John, I say in between bites. I'm about to bring up the bird again when she kisses me on the head. Don't talk, Bokhor aziz, she commands before turning around to rummage through her kitchen cabinet. She's singing an old Iranian tune, but I don't recognize the lyrics. Maybe I have a concussion. You're fine, says my mother, as if she can read my thoughts. She puts a glass of warm water in front of me. Nothing is broken, nothing is swollen. She grabs my chin and looks at my eyes. I smell tea and saffron on her breath. Your eyes focus with no problem. Amu Doctor always gave me khakshir to his patients who had taken a fall. If they threw it up, he knew they needed to go to the hospital. She pours the brown khakshir powder in the water and stirs it. These days, before they even look at you, they take CAT scans and give you poisonous medicine with side effects that make you addicted. She adds honey in the glass, the earthy, and holds a spoonful of the liquid mixture in front of me. I open my mouth like a baby bird swallowing the earthy, sweet khakshir as I did a million times when I was little. Our traditional medicine has worked for centuries. Why change? She pushes the glass in front of me. Drink the rest. I obey while she watches me with all her attention. I put the empty glass on the table. I'll die for you, she says. Thank you. I feel better, I say. This isn't the proper response to her pronouncement. I'll die for you is the exaggerated and often overused Iranian catchphrase for I love you, thank you, you're welcome, and depending on what gesture you use, not right now. May God never will it is the appropriate response, but she has already turned away, pouring tea into 2 Estecan cups.
I love that. We certainly have a lot of expressions, and many of them, when you try to explain them, they don't translate very well. Literal translations seem like such an exaggeration, but there again goes the poetry, right? And storytelling.
Exactly.
So I'm trying to mind our time and see how many more questions we have time for before we take questions from the audience. So of course, you set it in Shiraz because that's where you had experience. And of course, I love that. And you used a lot of Farsi words and expressions throughout the book, which I loved, by the way. But I know that, for example, the Audible has someone narrating it, but in the printed version, there's a glossary, there are footnotes, so there are ways for people to see the word instantly. But I understand there's a way to just click on something in Audible and get a PDF that accompanies it.
Right. There is a 3 vertical dots on the right side of the book, and then it will bring up the option to go to the PDF.
Okay, sounds good. And then how did you come up with the cover art and the title? I understand you drew the cover art.
I did. Yeah, so I migrated to the US without my parents at the age of 14 under extraordinary circumstances. And I basically forgot about, I was so busy trying to fit in and rid myself of any traces of otherness that I forgot my poetry for a little bit. And it was a decade later when I had an encounter with that ascending feeling that was like a mythical bird, like the Simorgh, about to soar into the skies. And that's when, out of nowhere, I began reciting Persian poetry aloud in Farsi, like you do in Iran, as a response to a question or express an idea. And to my surprise, people didn't say, "Get her out of here, she's gone mad." Instead, they said, "Oh, wow, that's so beautiful. Can you translate that?" So I started making paintings of these calligrams out of Persian verses, turning the Farsi words into an image. And because I really didn't feel like my translations were doing justice to that beautiful poetry. So but then many encouraged me to go ahead and translate anyways, because up to recently, most popular English translate collections of Persian poetry were composed by white men who don't speak Farsi. So I came up with Rumi's Gift Oracle card deck, which is a nod to our fall, the Persian divination, and also a bridge to tarot. So it's got cards and anyways. So the cover art is a Simorgh out of that Rumi's gift, and the words is a verse attributed to Rumi turned into the Simorgh, and that's هفت شهر عشق را عطار گشت ما هنوزن در خم یک کوچه ایم. It says Attar explored the 7 valleys of love. We are still trying to get around one corner.
Yeah, I love that. That is frequently used. That phrase is a very common one. I love that. I want to find out more about your card deck. Maybe we can put something in the chat for people so they can find out more about it and where to get it. The other thing I wanted to ask you was something that I loved, which Kimian, her best friend, did all the time instead of saying hello. And it brought back a lot of memories for me personally because I kind of lived that experience. But I wanted to see, why was it so frequently used, and what was the significance? What's the significance that people should draw from that particular piece?
Yeah, so I wrote an article at the beginning of the pandemic called "When Savoring a Pleasant Moment is a Radical Act," and I talk about the war on our coping mechanisms when we were in Iran. So for us in Iran, being joyful became both an act of survival, an act of defiance. It was as if our nervous system knew exactly what to do in the face of so much oppression and trauma. So we essentially gave the middle finger to the elements that were trying to harm us. So something so disruptive as not having electricity and not having water became this delightful joke, a ritual that we greet one another with. And I wasn't sure if the non-Iranian readers would get this, but they do. So yeah, I could read an excerpt, or if we're running out of time, we can.
We are running low. Let me see. We just have about 3 or 4 more minutes before we're going to go to questions. But I wanted to give you an opportunity here to tell us what your next projects are and a little bit about your organization if you want. But more importantly, what are you working on and what's coming up next for you as far as projects or writing or other?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that. So right now I have a few projects in the works. I'm doing a guided meditation with, I'm putting Rumi's music, poetry into music, and then following those verses with a guided meditation and then a sound immersion at the end. and I'm still continuing dancing with refugees on both sides of the border. And I have several events that are coming up that if you go to my website, you can look at them.
So we'll make sure to share your website both on Elliott Bay and on Siska, so people can follow that. And let's see, any recommendations for people who are interested in delving deeper into this period in Iran's history, or the past 40 years, I should say? It seems like it's so long, and or mysticism and the storytelling tradition. Any books come to mind?
Sure. I definitely recommend The Children of the Jackaronda Tree by Sahar Dilijani. She's this young woman who was born in Evin prison in Iran. And she's a beautiful writer and talks about the experience of being in prison in Iran. And then it goes back and forth between escaping and being in the West, and then going, and then those times in Iran. This next one is Rabia Ghafari's To Keep the Sun Alive, and that's also in that period. It's a beautiful novel. And The Stationery Shop by Marjan Kamali is about the 1953 coup, and then comes fast forwards to time in America too. And for translations, besides my Rumi's Gift, I recommend Zara Hushman's Moon and Sun.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you for that. So what would you like the readers to take away with, after reading this book? Like, do you have a call to action for them?
Oh, I love this question. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I work with two nonprofits, Gente Unida, which focuses on migrant children, and Musical Ambassadors of Peace, which focuses on the healing powers of music and dancing. And as I mentioned, I run music and dance circles specifically for refugees. And that's something, music was denied to me as a kid. So I like to bring it to other refugees, and the sense of community, which I didn't have as a 14-year-old in the US. So yeah, a portion of the proceeds go to these two organizations. I like to also take a moment and honor Cameron Powers, who has shot. He passed away yesterday. He was the founder of Musical Ambassadors of Peace, and he dedicated his life to refugees.
Thank you, and sorry for your loss. And I think my takeaway would be, in general, from your book, not all of the great projects you're working on, but I think I would just ask people to not only read your book, but try and find out more about Persian culture and Iranian people, and what we are all about currently, and what brings us here, what makes us who we are, and learn something about our traditions, our food, our poetry, our storytelling. There's so much rich history to delve into that I think, it's a wonderful culture to immerse yourself in. And that's what I would like people to take away. Let this be, if they haven't read anything else about Iran, let this be their first entree. And thank you so much for adding this to the compendium of books out there that kind of give a glimpse as to who we are in a fun and engaging way. Really wonderful book. I love it. So I think I would love, if you're okay with that now, to see if we can pull up some of the questions. And okay, so people are looking forward to reading these. Let's see. Let me see if I can pull up the questions. Let's see. All right. Hang on. I'm working on a laptop that's not mine. So, Dara, do you think you could help pull up these questions and see what is here? Okay, let me scroll up, because I think, let's see. Go ahead. I think Karen was monitoring some of the questions. Just a minute. Okay. Okay. All right. So
There's one from Enrique. I'm sorry, because I was seeing it.
great. I'm glad you jumped in. Go ahead.
Okay. I was asking, how can we help you? I think it's to both of you. How can we help you promote this must-read book? Such great, important reviews and awards, and love A Girl Called Rumi. Merci. That was Enrique. Yeah.
Oh, you're so sweet, Enrique. Thank you. Yeah, I would say just writing reviews on Amazon or Goodreads is one way to get the word out, recommending it to your friends. It's from a small publisher, Forest Avenue Press. So we want to both support small publishers and independent bookstores. So whenever you can, go to independent bookstores and support indie publishers. And yeah. And you've been so wonderful, Enrique, already supporting this book.
Yeah, and obviously the organizations that you mentioned would also be helpful. And here locally in Seattle, there are several nonprofit organizations that do cultural work with the Iranian community. You can follow us on Facebook, Seattle Isfahan Sister City Advocacy, and see what we're up to. We always have projects that we would love more involvement in, especially from the Americans, the non-Iranian Americans in the community. So we would love to see more of that. And let's see, there is going to be our friend and board member Omid Rustai is going to make that sangak bread at the pantry. So
I love it.
If you want to look up, he's going to have a cooking class showing you how to do that. Comment that the book is fabulous. It's historical, magical. That's wonderful. And people can't wait to get their book copies. And let's see, what other questions do we have here? Rick, do you see? Because I'm scrolling.
I'd say Omid actually then had another comment, which is everyone's talking about his food. He's also posting a link to the book on his blog, thecaspianchef.com.
Oh, he's so sweet. Thank you, Omid.
Monica has this in here, and you're mostly getting exclamations. Everyone's so entranced, I think, is everyone's in the sense of wonder, and it sometimes feels a little literal to come back to other kinds of, because also Cathia has done such a nice job of having a conversation with those in there. But Monica's writing, this book is on my favorites list, a beautiful, magical, and amazing story. I've recommended it to many of my reading friends and family and passed along the story as well. I hope to read it again. Yeah. And then
they're also asking for the recommendations. I think Karen put the recommendations in as she was going along, as you were mentioning them.
This is the second one. She got Children of the Jackaronda Tree, and I think she missed Ari's second.
Oh, Keep the Sun Alive.
Right. Oh yeah, that was it.
Yeah. Okay. All right, let me see what other questions there were.
Nancy suggesting maybe a little more reading wouldn't be a bad thing.
The piece that we skipped, maybe because we thought we wouldn't have time. I think you were on page 15. You were going to read about.
Sure.
Yeah, maybe we can do that.
So this is when we get introduced to Reza, the 10-year-old friend of Kimia, who they're best friends, but they're not supposed to really be hanging out together because of the Islamic laws. One of the new Islamic laws forbade boys and girls from touching one another, but the alley looked empty and my heart was leaping with joy. I grabbed Reza's hand and we ran, giggles falling like scattered cherry blossoms behind us. Do you have water today? I yelled. No. Do you have electricity today? Reza yelled back. No, I said, and we both erupted in laughter. We rounded a corner, still laughing. 3 men in dark clothes and too much facial hair paused their conversation when they heard our chuckles. We unclasped our hands in a flash, shut our mouths, and looked down, assuming the most somber looks we could muster. With my eyes still on the ground, I whispered, "Let's go see what the missile did." "Are you crazy?" Reza said without looking at me. "We'll get into trouble." "Not if they don't catch us." Reza grumbled something, but let me lead the way. As we got closer to the impact site, the stench of the smoldering buildings grew stronger. The smell brought with it flashes of the chaos, Armand's silent screams, and the beating. I covered my nose and mouth with my scarf. Reza brought his forearm to his face, breathing into his jacket sleeve. We stuck to the alley to avoid crowds on the larger streets. When the odor no longer bothered me, I brought my head close to Reza's and whispered, "I was there." "Where the missile hit?" he asked, his voice high and with incredulity. "No, Divune, at the square. There was a storyteller I've never seen before. He was strange, but well, I don't know." I switched to a whisper. "I think he's a magician, or at the very least, a friend to the Jinn folks." Reza whispered back, "That's nonsense. Plus, she shouldn't be talking about magic. The Imam." I hushed them as I heard some men shout from around the corner. "What?" Reza mouthed. I eased a glance around the corner and then tugged on Reza's shirt. "Look!" We both stared at the rubble of an office building that had collapsed onto the adjacent kebab shop. Reza stood transfixed. "When we got out of town, guess my Baba brought home kebab bag from there." He pointed to the hulking pile. Volunteers were combing through the rubble. I realized we were too exposed. "Come on," I pulled at Reza again. We found a partially destroyed garden wall and ducked behind it. "Do you think there are dead people under all that?" Reza asked. "Probably," I replied with a shrug, but I already knew no missing people had been reported in the paper. Somehow that fib made the moment more exciting and our adventure more important. Without warning, I jumped over the lowest part of the wall and scrambled up the rubble pile. Since girls weren't allowed to climb, I had to be lightning quick. Kimia, Reza hissed. But I climbed on. About 2/3 of the way up the rubble pile, I pulled a bright red scarf from the crevice. Despite the dust, it was in good condition and its heavy silkiness felt sublime in my hands. I tied it around my neck as if it were a cape and stood like a hijabi superhero with my fists on my hips. Reza started laughing. A couple of workmen spotted me and yelled. Reza lost his smile and motioned frantically. I glanced back at the workmen. They were clambering over the rubble toward me. I took one more look around from my perch, spread my arms out wide, and ran down the mountain of destruction, my red cape flying behind me.
Love that scene. Oh, she is so courageous. I was constantly like holding my breath every time I would read about her because I knew what the consequences could be, right? Having lived there. There is a question about if there are any from Yusuf Ganji. Are there plans to publish a Persian version of the book?
Oh, I mean, if someone was interested in publishing it in Iran, I guess, but I don't know how well it would be received because it's so critical of the situation.
But you don't personally have plans to get it translated or to write it in Farsi or have someone do that?
There are a few people who are interested, but I haven't. I haven't made any plans yet.
Okay, that's great. Any parting thoughts that you would have for our readers? Any suggestions? And then go out and get the book and read it.
Yeah, I love the part, in the book, the storyteller says all states of being are sacred. So let's honor the totality of life and welcome joy when it's here and not suppress suffering when it's here. So let's do that, and if we can help others or help organizations who are, are working hard to help others.
Well, thank you for all the work you're doing, especially now with the refugees from Afghanistan. So I really appreciate it. And it seems like, as they say, the same 20% are always, you're running into the same people doing all the work, all the volunteer work and all the good work. And so you're covering so much ground with everything from every angle. I really appreciate it. So we can't wait to have you here in Seattle, right, Rick?
Absolutely. And thank you both. It's been interesting thinking about the audience being quiet as I mean, comments but the questions. But I think if for the times that I'm sure, I don't know how much Ari has gotten to do where with live audiences, there's a posted picture of you with a live audience, which I think is during the pandemic times. But the part where sometimes they come up and tell you these stories or ask questions when you're getting their book signed. And that's sometimes where, they're shy about saying some of those things sometimes. I mean, in a way too, I think I didn't touch on this before, but you're dealing with, spiritual material that really that sometimes is hard for people to talk about. And you've done it so beautifully in the book that it's still very much a novel, but novels that have that kind of information don't come across people, they're reading every day. For all the books you've done, love a wonderful job with that. And thank you also for mentioning the Rumi deck, the tarot deck, the oracle deck, because I'm sort of bookishly inclined. I forget there are also things besides books, and that was done a few years ago, the Rumi oracle deck. Cathia, it's been wonderful too, both to get to hear you more, but also at the outset knowing the work that you and the Seattle Isfahan Sister City Advocacy are doing and will do, and more things we're doing. In fact, it'll be more visible online soon, but the poet Samaj Sharif will be doing an evening like this next month on March 14th, I think. And the Seattle Isfahan Sister City Advocacy will be co-presenting that as well. Ari, thank you so much. And we come up this way. People will keep wanting to hear. It's been wonderful to hear you read and both of you talk, but I think it'd be fun to have you in person here soon too.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to jump in there, Rick, and remind people that the next month is going to be a busy one for Persians all over. It's the Iranian New Year, and it's on March 20th or 21st usually. And so try to learn more about it. It's actually a UNESCO UN observed holiday and celebration that is celebrated by 11 countries, not just Iran. So hopefully people will find out more about Nowruz, the Persian New Year. And I think I just have a late breaking question. They want to know if the program is recorded. Yes, I think Elliott Bay records all their author interviews and they're then posted on YouTube. So we'll both Elliott Bay and Cisco will post the link soon as it's available.
Cathia, I know you said that because of your relationship as a sort of a formal, aligned organization, but will you post, or will there be, is there a place online people can find out about Nowruz, what's being done in the community?
Yes, there are several organizations that are going to be doing virtual or in-person observations of the event this year, but usually we have a big event at Seattle City Hall that we've been doing. The last one was right before the pandemic. We had to cancel, but 1,500 people attend that. We have a huge summer festival that happens in Seattle that's put on by IACA, Iranian American Community Alliance. That's a sister organization here in Seattle, and you can find out details about that. It's going to be June 25th this year.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so there's lots of stuff always happening. There's Payvant and Alifba and other organizations. We even have a Persian language school that's K through 12 at this point, helping kids who are heritage students learn about the language and the culture. So there's a lot going on in Seattle. You wouldn't think it. We don't have a huge population here, but we're very active.
Yeah,
And we would love to welcome you, Ari.
I'm so proud of you all, and I would love to join. Thank you.
I won't go on to sell other stories, but that's great to know about the date for the day at the sales center, that festival, because we're usually there. So we sell books by Iranian authors, and there's usually lots of books and good food and music and all sorts of programs. But writers are there too. So
yeah, fantastic. Maybe we'll have you come during the summer event, or at some other time when we have something going on here. We will have you come out to Seattle, and I think now people are really intrigued. You'll have a crowd there.
Yay.
Sign your book.
I would love to meet my Seattle family.
yes.
Thank you so much, Rick, and Karen behind the scenes, and our own Zahra behind the scenes helping us, and Nancy, of course, from Siska. And everyone just go out and get this book, and get it from Elliott Bay. You can order online, please. We don't need to, have the big organizations selling books now. We can get it from support our booksellers.
Yes. Thank you again, everyone. Take care. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks.
Thank you.